In the 10th chapter of St. Matthew's Gospel, our Lord says something very direct, very challenging, and very, in a way, troubling if we reflect upon it in and of ourselves instead of in and of our Lord Jesus. The 10th chapter of St. Matthew's Gospel begins with this terse sentence. It says, Jesus said to the 12, "Fear no one." Our Lord Jesus, in 3 words, identifies a life maxim: fear no one. He explains that there is no human person under the sun from whom we ought to experience intimidation to such an effect that we, in the depths of our being, fear. Fear no one, he says. He continues, nothing is concealed that will not be revealed, nor secret that will not be known. What I say to you in the darkness, speak in the light. What you hear whispered, proclaim on the housetops. And then he says, and do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather be afraid of the one who can destroy both body and soul. This is very significant because what our Lord is identifying is the natural human disordered tendency to be afraid. And what are we afraid of? He points to knowledge. We experience fear of others, not so much. It's possible at times to be afraid of physical attacks, physical affronts, physical engagements. But more often than not, our fears of other human persons come about because of what they might or might not think about us. It's in the domain of knowledge, how I exist in someone's mind. This is what troubles me, troubles you, troubles us. We can live our whole lives attempting to assuage people's criticisms, their false perceptions, or their accurate perceptions. We can work to make ourselves exist in a good way in someone's mind. And the fundamental speculative problem with this is that you and I don't exist in the fullest, in the most actual, and in the most real way in the minds of others. The intentional existence that we have in the minds of others, which is just a technical way of saying how they think of us, what they think of us, those are less real conceptions than the conception that we have in our very being that God has communicated to us. I exist, you exist in ourselves. We live, we move, we have our being from God, and we have an existence which is independent of the conceptions of others. And often at the expense of our own existence in and of ourselves, we attempt to shape and devote our whole lives to shaping how we're conceived of, how we exist in the minds, the knowledge of others. One's good name, of course, is a true good, and one ought never to deprive one of his or her good name. But conversely, no one is ever happy, no one is ever satisfied, no one is ever saved through how they exist in the thoughts, in the minds of others. How a human person thinks of us does not save us. Therefore, if another person doesn't think highly of us, or doesn't think accurately of us, or doesn't think appreciatively of us, this does not mean that our being in and of ourselves is compromised. And then we see at the end, towards the end of today's gospel, that our Lord shifts from knowledge, not just in other people's minds now, there's no secret that will not be known, but rather he shifts to our Father's knowledge, God's own knowledge. He says, are not 2 sparrows sold for a small coin, yet not one of them falls to the ground without your Father's knowledge. Even all the hairs of your head are counted. Do not be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. Here, Jesus invites us to be more concerned about how God thinks of us. And here we invoke the eternal law, how God knows the world to be. That's what the eternal law is. And how God knows the world to be, he communicates to the world that he knows to be, the being that he knows it to have, giving it the shape, the value, the order, the nature, the perfective tendencies, and even the actualized potential or actualizable potential that it retains. God's knowledge of reality is much more important, much more potent, much more significant, much more salvific, and ultimately much more real, connected to reality, than what other people think of us. So if we put these two things together, how people think of us and how God thinks of us and how we are in ourselves, the clarity of the Christian life comes into clearer focus in our own way of seeing things. The clarity enters into our own regard, our own contemplation, because we can fear being viewed badly, poorly, inaccurately by others. And we can feel deprived of something when someone thinks of us in a way that is not very flattering. Conversely, we can think well of ourselves if we exist well in their minds. It's possible, we know this, for someone to be a fraud, for someone to be disingenuous, for someone to be a poser, to present themselves in a false way and have other people think well of them, even though they are not worthy of those positive estimations. The fragility of the esteem of others is not something that the Christian lives for. Rather, we live in the knowledge and in the love of God. And unlike the thoughts of human persons, which are not creative, which cannot ultimately constitute us in our being, God's knowledge and God's love is creative. The scientia approbationis, the knowledge by which God, in his wisdom and in his love, orders us, can save us, can restore us when we fall, can heal us when we're broken, can reorder us and perfect us in himself. This is the knowledge that Jesus invites us to live in. And so, today and all days, may we reflect upon the fact that we ought not fear. Do not be afraid. So many live in a state of perpetual fear that is now at times indistinguishable from their very existence, afraid of people's estimations of them. May we live immune to this fear and rather live in the consolation, in the truth that God's knowledge is much more important, God's love is much more important, and all those who cling to Jesus in their own knowledge and love are thought well of in God, because all those who cling to Jesus and find their identity in Jesus ultimately find their identity, their being, and their salvation in God himself, and God always understands himself and all things united to him well.